Quinault Indian Reservation, 190 acres of forest land located near the Olympic rainforest on the western Washington coast. Once a verdant wilderness and natural watershed, it is now the scene of a three-sided controversy between and among the Indians themselves, the Bureau of Indian Affairs, and the logging companies. This controversy has been boiling for a number of years, largely the manifestation of a larger crisis involving the management of forest resources. In looking at the forest management side of the controversy, forestry expert D. Terry had this to say about the Bureau of Indian Affairs' Sustained Yield Program.
Indians were sold when much of their lands were put under management by the Bureau of Indian Affairs. That is, the Bureau of Indian Affairs promised the Indians sustained yield management. However, to date, results of the scene on the reservation is what I call liquidation management. There's streams, the whole ecological system is, for all practical purposes, destroyed.
Brock Evans, Northwest representative for the Sierra Club, had this to say about forest management practices at Quinault.
Logging operations in all of Northwest North America, and I could pretty safely say that with perhaps the exception of the Redwood region, this is by far the worst logging I've ever seen. It's much more like mining or like a battlefield than logging, in my personal opinion.
What do you attribute much to what you've seen to?
Well, obviously I think it's I put it in two primary faults, two parties to blame. The first would be the timber companies themselves. They know better. They know that logging like this destroys the land. They know that logging like this destroys the fisheries. They know that they shouldn't do logging like this, and they know that it's not permitted elsewhere, but they went right on ahead and did it when they should have taken the initiative not to do it and to have better practices. Perhaps even more to blame is the Bureau of Indian Affairs itself, which has jurisdiction over these sales, which administers the sales, which is supposedly doing this for the benefit of the Indians. There's no evidence of a plan, no evidence of any inventory or data gathering, no evidence of any concern for any values other than getting those board feet out and hang the cost and hang everybody else and hang the fishery. So I would blame it certainly on the BI very, very much, and the timber companies too.
There's been no planning also for future management.
Well, no, this appears to be liquidation management. They're cutting and getting out. They're stripping off the big old trees and they're cutting them down. They're putting them into the creek beds so the salmon can't spawn anymore, and they're leaving. We didn't see very many places where there's any good regeneration or reforestation at all. Hardly any of it. For one thing, the piles of slash and junk are piled so high you couldn't get a grow tree in there if you had to.
The timber alone, I can't understand how the Bureau of Indian Affairs could have let such practice go on for so long, because they preach sustained yield to us, and we clear our timber. We want our resources to remain as near as natural as it has been in the past. And yet they tell us one thing: you want to keep your timber growing for 40 years, we come back and harvest it again. What were they thinking when they did this? There's never, never. It just, well, it really looked like a graveyard to me. It just made me sick. It just reminded me of it.
During a bus tour of the reservation,
the area of land that's out of production is just staggering. Examine it all from an airplane. Oftentimes you think it's just along the road that you don't see things, but it's the whole south end. Looks like there's been logged so many years ago that it all should be very rich looking area now, but it isn't. It's not red.
mismanagement of forest resources has yet another important facet, that of the effect of current logging practices on salmon-producing streams in the area. Fisheries expert Gary Stauffer comments.
Yes, there are 4 main river systems on the Quinault reservation. Of these, every one of them has been touched by logging at various points. The streams and the rivers are very important to the Quinault people. They are known as fish-eating people. Over the years, the salmon runs have declined drastically. Many of the people are no longer in fisheries and commercial fishing. The reservation has a great potential. The future of the reservation, as far as salmon is concerned, is almost nil if things don't change in the logging. Streams have been logged across, completely annihilated by logging companies.
This destroys spawning beds?
This destroys the stream habitat for the salmon to spawn in, to incubate the eggs, to feed, and to go downstream. It stops their migration, it stops egg incubation, and it stops fish feeding. There's over 1,000 miles of stream on the reservation. I think there's more than that, but that's the estimate from USGS. Every one of these streams has been touched in some way by logging and has been drastically destroyed in many places.
What are some of the common situations that you've come across in your research and field work?
The things that you see most are streams filled with debris to the point you can't find the streams. The second thing you see are streams that are being ripped off in a way of having all their vegetation, their gravel, washed downstream. They're scoured. The banks are caving in. The third thing you see are poorly placed culverts. There isn't one culvert on the reservation that is installed according to standard engineering manufacturers' culvert handbooks. They are all, that I have checked, wrong. They're misplaced.
This was where this gravel pit was one heck of a nice little stand of second growth hemlock and Douglas fir, and that's where they had to put the gravel pit in there.
What the BIA call this intensive stream management right here. It's done with a D8 Caterpillar tractor. This is a small stream flowing out of a cedar swamp in the background. Only about 500 feet there, but this gives you an idea how they tend to ignore small intermittent streams. And the fish biologists tell us that they produce about 30% of the coho salmon.
They're looking at some of the deposits in the stream bottom. It's nothing but muck, decaying, decomposing organic material. The gravel I'm standing on isn't stream gravel, but road gravel from that culvert that's washed out a number of times and washed out twice since the logging closure.
There's the start of that 60-foot fall Butch was talking about. If I were a fish, I don't know how I'd get up there.
As slash decomposes, does that have any effect upon the streams and rivulets?
The slash that's left in streams does have drastic effects. When the wood products when the wood decomposes, it requires oxygen from the water. It takes the oxygen out, leaving none for the fish or biological activity. Also, the chemical products resulting from decomposition reduce the water quality to the point where it may not be clean enough for fish to survive.
I see. Also, in conjunction with this, if someone yards logs across the stream, you get the soil into the stream. And that must affect the beds also, doesn't it?
Oh, this drastically affects the whole production of the river system. Sediment is one of the most killing things to the stream. And it takes a long number of years to get the sediment washed out and into the ocean. It suffocates the eggs, it kills off food supplies, and it lasts for a long time.
Well, if you have sediment, can salmon spawn in sediment?
They can spawn in the gravel, but the eggs will die.
In February, the National Council of American Indians held a meeting at the Quinault Lodge, during which the various tribal representatives present discussed common problem areas. Helen Mitchell talked about some of the problems experienced by the Quinault.
February 1869, they were told to break up the slash areas. January 23rd, 1970, they were told to prevent streams from becoming obstructed by felled trees. March 16th of 1970, the Bureau advised the Lowell Lumber Company not to harm the streams. April 27th, 1970, another letter on streams. August 27th, 1970, waste from improper bucking practices, slash and streams were also mentioned in this letter. February 18th, 1971 was another violation that they wrote, and here's a whole page of violations with the dates behind them. This continued clear through till the tribe took the action of closing logging operations through the vehicles parked across the access road to the reservation, to show you that, you know, the Indians aren't really alone in this thing. The Aloha's crew of loggers that were brought out there to go through in the event we took down the blockade came across the management and passed the county sheriff and shook hands with our guys and said, "We're all for you, stick with it."
Also present at the Quinault Lodge meeting were Guy McMines, director of the Resources Development Project at Quinault, and Sherwin Broadhead from the Colville Tribal Indian Office.
I think President Nixon alluded to some of the problems that were involved here in his speech in July 8, 1970, of a bureaucracy which has grown up, which has not been responsive to Indian needs and Indian desires, and has not had communication directly with the tribes. And as a result, many times they have been a run wild bureaucracy. They have had associations which were more important to them with other agencies of government. Yes, and largely BIA has been a group of people who have come here from somewhere else. And too often where they're at is in another community. They're in a non-Indian community, and they find a closer communication with logging company executives and people of this kind than they do the tribe. They haven't cultivated this communication.
Allowed by the BIA, and I want to put quotes around that Bureau of Indian Affairs. Allowed by the unresponsive, decadent BIA. Now there are some young moving forces in the Bureau today that would dearly love to correct the irresponsibility that has gone on in the past. But they're so hamstrung now they can't move a muscle. An example is one of the young men right next to me who was having a running battle with the Portland area office, and his battle is typical of ours. He is trying to get around that Portland area office, the area office that's sleeping with other federal agencies and big business.
Why can't the BIA as an agency come up with this kind of an evaluation from within? Of course, in their case, it's fairly obvious. Most of the people in the BIA hierarchy have been here at one time or another and have some of their personal career invested here.
The thing that I can't help but think is that it was the neglect of the Bureau of Indian Affairs in the first place that let this land get in that kind of shape. And I don't feel that it should be our people that suffer for the next thousands of years, and as you said, land has been wiped out.
The accusations by tribal members of alleged failure of the BIA to perform its contract responsibilities was countered by Hoquiam Area Forest Manager Joe Jackson and Everett Regional Agency Superintendent George Felshaw. Mr. Jackson had this to say about the adequacy of reforestation programs on the reservation.
Some of the statements, for example, no reforestation, these are obviously not based on facts. We've measured the reproduction on the reservation in Tola, Crane Creek, and various other places up on Quinault. We find them quite adequate. Those areas that were subject to repeated burns, we are reforesting right now. we've spent close to $170,000 planting trees out there. And we've been doing this for the last 2 or 3 years, and we have done it in the past under other public projects. And I think as of last year, we had reported close to 2,700 acres planted. See? And there are reports that indicate we didn't plant anything.
Is there a reforestation program going on currently?
It skims the surface. In 1969, there was appropriation of around $90,000 for reforestation, and this was laid out one night and seedlings were bought the next day, and you cannot manage timberland in this manner. It has to be planned some 3 years in advance to do it correctly. Now this, in 1967, we had the Raft River fire. It was burned over 6,600 acres. There was an attempt to reseed, and that failed.
If you would consider the entire reservation as being Indian-owned, say 190,000 acres, we have at the present time a residual area of logging in the Tohola and Crane Creek units. And I would say roughly approximately 40,000 acres remains to be logged out of the 190. In the Queets area, there is very few Indian allotments left to be logged. And I would dare say there's not more than, say, 9,000 acres of Indian allotments to be logged in the Queets. So possibly out of the total area, you've got close to 40,000 acres that might contain merchantable timber out of the 190. So 150,000 acres of the reservation has been cut over.
We go across country with plots that are systematically and randomly located and measure the reproduction processes on the reservation, and we know for a fact that the reproduction is adequate.
How many acres are settled on some of these there are now?
Well, I would say a good 100,000 acres.
We didn't see very many places where there's any good regeneration or reforestation at all. Hardly any of it. For one thing, the piles of slash and junk are piled so high you couldn't get a grow tree in there if you had to. These enormous slash piles they've left are just tinder boxes in our long hot summers up here.
Keep in mind that this is red cedar. This is the wood that shingles are made out of, and you know how that burns when it's dry. And there's about 80,000 acres just like this on the reservation.
Down there in the Cook Creek area, with Mr. Stilz I was talking about, we've planted almost all of that back now. But you have to realize that a large part of that Cook Creek area is free land, and this road travels through free land. Well, we're not doing anything with that free land, and it contributes to a bad eyesore. But the Indian allotments, we've been planting those. And if you want to see those, we can take you out there and walk your legs off in a day and show you acres and acres we've planted down there. And nobody sees this from the cedar bud. We went out on our own. Yeah. That's the only way to see it. And a lot of these trees you don't even see when you start walking over the slabs. You've got to get down there and part the brush and look at them.
What do you feel about the streams that have, you can go out and see the streams that are completely full of slash and deadfalls and things that have been just dumped in the stream beds where fish couldn't get up them anyway? There's no way fish
I
could
think
get
this is overplayed. We have actual on-the-ground experience that in, say, the Raft River, there are enormous log jams in those rivers before any logging was ever conducted. And insofar as the two big contracts are concerned, we are in a process right now of cleaning those streams out, and there has been an enormous amount of fisheries developed, even with the logging supposedly as bad as it was, and a good transportation of logs and movement of water from one side of the road to another. Culverts at that time were not, you might say, placed to facilitate the movement of migrating fish. Well, that's not true now. We are now putting culverts to facilitate the movement of anadromous fish in the Quinault unit. Now, this is just a recent development, and however, not all culverts are badly placed. It's just that there was no real recognition of this until in the last few years. And now this is being corrected.
I thought I hit a gold mine one day. I was going along this road and looked off and I saw a culvert that was properly placed according to all types of specifications, including fisheries. I got fairly excited thinking that I was on the reservation, and then it dawned on me I was not on the reservation, so we still don't have a properly placed culvert.
I would hazard to guess that the logging out in Quinault has been relatively commensurate with logging in the whole industry in the West here. These people that log out there, and some of them log other places, like on the State Forest Service warehouse or anybody else. And the practice that they practice on the Quinault are comparable to what they would do at other places. It is only within recent years, very recently, that the interest in the ecology of the environment has been so pronounced that it has caused other segments of the logging practices to be more closely scrutinized.
Mr. Felshaw, do you feel that ALOA and ITT Rainier have fulfilled the requirements of the contract, or have even fulfilled good logging practices?
Well, I think we have to accept the fact that both companies are in the business to make money. And it would stand to reason that any contractor would try to cut corners to save money here and there wherever he could, but still not get himself classified as a deliberate attempt to violate a contract. I suspect there's instances where the company or the Bureau of Indian Affairs has not caused the company to measure up to absolute maximum in some instances of road construction, for example. It may not have used top quality judgment in locating the road in a good location. It might have been in some instances to the convenience of the company. So I'm sure there's room for criticism against some of the provisions of the contract, but I don't think they're of such magnitude that it's such that the Indian owners of the timber have lost money.
What about prices that the Indians are getting for their timber? How do they compare to the outside?
Over the span of the two contract areas, this is the Tahola unit and the Crane Creek unit. Over the span of the last 20 years, they've received anywhere from 50% to 60% of the real market value of the timber.
And what about slash that's left on the ground? Is there a loss to the alati from that slash that's left?
There certainly is. On these lands, this is land that is being logged by Loa Lumber Corporation. There's anywhere from 3,000 to 8,000 feet of birchable wood left on those areas. This is not the only loss. There's a further loss that's compounded by this slash situation, and that is through regeneration, growing trees for the next crop. It's been estimated that up to $50 per acre per year that this land is out of production is lost to the Indian landowner.
The loss of the Quinault, to me, is more than just the timber and leaving that land idle. The land is not producing anything and hasn't for evidently 50 years or so.
The other thing is that it's not only a detriment to this Indian reservation, it is to the whole economy of this area when you leave land in the shape that our land is.
The question, what can be done to prevent a reoccurrence of these problems in the future?
Well, one of the things that I see in a meeting of this nature with the NCAI is that pressure could be brought to bear on the bureaucracies that are responsible for things like this, to where the Indian people could manage their own lands. The Quinault Indians are woodsmen to begin with, and with very little effort could become darn good foresters. If that isn't possible in the near future, then I think pressure should be brought to bear on the Bureau of Indian Affairs to do a better job of management.
As part of this resources development project, what is being now to ensure proper resource development on the reservation as far as fisheries go?
Since the logging closure in September, the ITT Rainier has agreed to negotiate with the tribe on 1972 logging plans. I have personally, Dean Terry and I have personally walked all the areas to be cut in 1972, and we've made recommendations on stream protection. ITT Rainier has said they will go along with the tribe on any reasonable recommendation. We've approved the logging plans, and we've made all our agreements, and things are working great. Aloha just presented our plans. I cannot approve their plans at the present way, under the way they're written up now, because they have not provided adequate stream protection.
As the representative of the Northwest area of the Sierra Club, are you contemplating any action as a result of what you've seen today?
Well, we've already attempted to put pressure on President Nixon and through him, the Bureau of Indian Affairs and others, to do something about cleaning up this disgraceful situation. We haven't gotten very far yet. I think we're going to have to step up the pressure a little bit more. Certainly there ought to be programs and funding or whatever else is necessary to clean this junk out of the streams and rehabilitate the fisheries. Certainly there ought to be full-scale programs to rehabilitate the cutover lands enough so that the trees can start growing back, and they're sure as heck not growing back right now.
Well, first of all, the slide presentation indicated that the Bureau of Indian Affairs has failed to fulfill its trust responsibility to the Quinault tribe. The Quinault tribe recognizes this and recognizes that they have a responsibility to themselves, and that responsibility is to govern the lands within their jurisdiction to the fullest benefit for the Quinault tribe. The tribe presently is taking steps to do this. We are trying to circumnavigate the Bureau of Indian Affairs to manage our own resources. But this is a very difficult task because the Bureau of Indian Affairs has statutory authority to manage us and our land. Okay? The way we're trying to circumnavigate it is like a small nation who gets recognition from other nations. We are trying to work with companies who are logging our land, and we're trying to get their recognition as a governmental viable moving force that is managing its own resources. Now, ITT Rainier Incorporated has recognized us as that governing body, and they have recognized us as having a responsibility to our people and our allottees, and they will deal with us. And they have said not the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But this is a pretty complicated statement because they have a contract with the Bureau of Indian Affairs, not us.
Rainier has a contract.
Right. So any final approval for any logging plans on the contracted unit have to come from the Bureau of Indian Affairs. But we are working together to get our input into logging plans, to get our input into stream protection, and I think it's been a valuable experience. We will continue to work towards circling the Bureau of Indian Affairs and trying to gain control of the management of our own resources. For example, in a recent trip to Washington, D.C., contract units. That is, the Quinault tribe will be the officer in charge. They will administer the 2 contracts, and we will have contract compliance authority. And the loggers, if they don't meet that, will be shut down. Now, in this, we want to get completely around the Portland area office, because the Portland area office is where our problem exists. The Portland area office is in bed with Evans Products down in Portland, Oregon. Their offices are nearby, and frankly, they sleep together. You know, the position of the Bureau of Indian Affairs is the position of the company. So there's some difficulties with one contract unit.
Well, have you, what you're saying, that in circumventing DIA authority, have you given up the avenue of trying to reconcile yourself with the DIA and look that way?
We, down at this level, have given up the possibility of working with the Bureau of Indian Affairs. In fact, the Allottees Committee booted the entire Bureau of Indian Affairs off of this Evans logging unit, or the Tohola unit. And they have even ordered that one of the foresters not be allowed within the reservation boundaries.
So, meanwhile, while the